I was pulling into my driveway late one afternoon when I watched in horror as my son's silver sedan sped around the corner without a single glance back. Resting coldly on my front porch was a box wrapped in brown paper bearing 4 handwritten words of pure warning: "Don't make a scene." My chest tightened, and instead of touching it, I immediately dialed 911. Just as the 2 officers opened the box to reveal the horrifying secret inside, my wife walked in, dropping her bags as the color completely drained from her face. "Our son? Did he actually do this? You found revenge, Dad, and I am genuinely thankful you are here. Tell me something. Where in the world are you right now? Drop your city or country in the comments." I read every single one. Some details here are shaped for educational purposes. Any similarity to names or places you know is coincidental, but the lesson waiting at the end is one I hope you carry with you. I have been a professor for 32 years. I have stood at the front of lecture halls and watched hundreds of young faces stare back at me, waiting for something true. I have graded 10,000 papers, written 4 books, and given the same opening speech every September for 3 decades. I thought I understood patience. I thought I understood how to read a situation before it unraveled. Jason did not wave. He did not slow down. The back of his silver sedan moved away from me, like he had never been there at all, and something in my chest tightened in a way I recognized but could not yet name. I sat in my car for a moment, with the engine still running. The house looked the same, as it always did, the oak tree Nancy had planted the year we moved, and the blue shutters I had painted myself 3 summers ago. The welcome mat that said "home" in letters she had chosen. Nothing looked wrong. That was the first thing that unsettled me. When something is truly wrong, it rarely announces itself. I turned off the engine and got out. The box was sitting on the top step of the porch. It was not large, about the size of a shoebox, wrapped in plain brown paper, tied with a piece of twine. A small card had been tucked beneath the knot. I leaned down and read it without touching the box. 4 words written in Jason's handwriting: "Don't make a scene." I stood there for a long moment with the evening sun on my back and those 4 words in front of me. In 32 years of teaching, I had learned that the most dangerous sentences are the ones that try to tell you how to react before you have even seen what you are reacting to. That card was not a message. It was an instruction. I did not touch the box. I went inside, set my briefcase on the kitchen table, and called 911. The dispatcher asked me to describe what I had found. I told her there was a package left on my porch by someone I knew, that there was a note telling me not to make a scene, and that I was a 60-year-old man who had spent enough years reading between lines to know that this was not a gift. 2 officers arrived within 8 minutes. Officer Hector Reyes was the one who crouched down and examined the card, first his blue gloves already on before he touched anything. His partner, Officer Dana Whitfield, walked the perimeter of the porch without being asked. "Did you open it at all, sir?" Reyes asked. "No," I said. "I read the card and called you." He nodded, like that was the right answer. Then he carefully cut the twine and folded back the brown paper. Inside was a white cardboard box, the kind you might use to store files. He lifted the lid. I saw the photograph first. It had been printed on standard paper, but the image was sharp enough. It showed me standing in what appeared to be a parking garage, holding a thick envelope with both hands. The man across from me was someone I did not recognize. We appeared to be in the middle of an exchange. I was looking directly at the envelope, and my expression in the photograph was focused in a way that looked to anyone who did not know me like careful concentration. I had never been in that photograph. I had never been in that parking garage. I had never held that envelope. My legs did not give out, but they wanted to. I pressed one hand flat against the porch railing and kept my voice steady. "That is not me," I said. "I mean, that is my face, but I was never there. That photograph does not exist." Officer Reyes did not argue with me. He reached back into the box and removed a folded set of papers. I could see from where I stood that they were printed text messages, screenshots, formatted to look like a conversation between a number labeled Professor Vance and several others labeled only with initials. The messages described prices, they described dates, they described something called the Spring Secured Exam Package in language that made my stomach turn, because it sounded exactly like something I might write in an email to a colleague, formal, precise, professional, and that was the point. Someone had studied how I write. Someone had fed my words into a machine and taught it to sound like me, and then used that voice to build a transaction I never had. Reyes lifted a third item from the box, a small digital recorder with a strip of black tape on the back. He placed it in an evidence bag without switching it on. Then he reached deeper and removed a bundle of cash rubber banded together inside a clear plastic sleeve with a handwritten label that read, "Deposit Spring Term." The four of us stood on that porch in the late afternoon light, and nobody said anything for a moment. Then Whitfield spoke from behind me. "Mr. Vance, is there anyone else who has access to this property?" Before I could answer, I heard the front door open behind me. I turned around. Nancy was standing in the doorway with her grocery bag still in her hands. She looked at the two officers. She looked at the open box. She looked at me. The color drained from her face so completely that I took a step toward her. Then she set the bags down on the floor of the entryway with a slowness that told me her hands were shaking, and she looked at everything spread out on that porch. The photograph, the fake messages, the cash. The recorder, and her voice came out barely above a whisper. "My son," she said. "Did he actually do this? Did he actually do all of this?" Nancy did not cry. That was the first thing I noticed. In 35 years of marriage, I had seen my wife cry at graduation ceremonies, at the funerals of people she barely knew, at television commercials involving dogs. But standing in our doorway with her hands empty and her face the color of old paper, she did not cry. She just kept looking at the contents of that box like she was trying to find a single item that would tell her she had misread everything. She had not misread anything. Officer Reyes gave her a moment. Then he asked her to step inside and take a seat. She moved to the living room couch the way people move when their legs are working on memory alone, and I sat beside her because I did not know what else to do. "Mrs. Vance," Reyes said, pulling a chair from the dining room and sitting across from us. "When did you last speak with your son?" Nancy pressed both hands flat against her knees. 3 days ago," she said. "He called me. He said he needed to talk about Arthur." She paused. "About my husband. What did he say?" She exhaled slowly, and I watched her jaw tighten the way it does when she is deciding how honest to be. Then she looked at me, and whatever she was deciding, she decided it in that moment. "He told me Arthur had been selling exam materials to students," she said. "He said he had proof, screenshots of messages, a photograph." Her voice did not waver, but her hands pressed harder against her knees. "He sent them to my phone. I looked at them for 2 days, Arthur. 2 whole days." The room felt like it tilted slightly. "You believed him," I said. "I did not want to," she said immediately. "But the messages looked real. The photograph looked real. Jason told me you had been under financial pressure since the department cut your research budget, and I knew that was true, and I—" She stopped. She pressed her lips together until they went white. "I told myself I was going to ask you about it. I was going to sit down with you and ask you directly. But then I came home tonight, and there were police officers in my living room, and I saw what was in that box, and I understood." "What did you understand?" Reyes asked. "That my son did not send that box to expose his father," Nancy said. "He sent it to finish what he started. He wanted Arthur to open it alone and be too frightened to call anyone." She looked at the brown paper still spread across our porch floor through the open door. The note said, "Don't make a scene." Jason has been saying that to both of us our entire lives. Every time we tried to hold him accountable for anything, it was always "don't make a scene, don't embarrass the family, don't make things worse." Her voice finally cracked on the last word, but she pulled it back. He was not warning Arthur. He was giving him an order. Officer Whitfield had been writing in her notepad. She looked up. "Mrs. Vance, do you still have the messages Jason sent you?" "Yes," Nancy said. "On my phone. We're going to need to document those." Nancy nodded and reached into her jacket pocket. Her fingers were trembling visibly when she unlocked the screen, and she held the phone out to Whitfield with both hands like it was something she wanted to be rid of. Reyes turned to me. "Professor Vance, aside from yourselves, does anyone else have a key to this property?" I opened my mouth to say no. Then I stopped. 14 months ago, Jason had called on a Sunday morning and offered to come help us clear out the storage room attached to the garage. Nancy had made lunch. Jason had spent 3 hours moving boxes, and I had been grateful in the uncomplicated way you are grateful when your adult child does something useful without being asked. He had been cheerful that day, patient. He had made jokes about the old furniture I refused to throw away. When he left, he hugged his mother in the driveway and told me the storage room looked great. I had not thought about that day in months. "We changed the front lock," I said slowly, "about 4 months ago when we stopped regular contact with Jason. But the back door," I looked at Nancy. We never changed the back lock. Nancy's eyes closed, not in relief, in the particular way people close their eyes when they realize the shape of something terrible. He offered to help with that storage room, she said quietly. He spent a long time near the back of the house. Yes, I said. Reyes stood up. With your permission, I'd like to walk the exterior of the property and check the back entrance. We both said yes at the same time. He was back in 4 minutes. He crouched in front of us with his elbows on his knees and spoke in the measured tone of someone delivering information he wishes he did not have. There are fresh scratches around the back door lock cylinder. I said, consistent with repeated use of a key that does not fit perfectly a copy rather than an original. Professor Vance, that door has likely been accessed more than once. Nancy made a sound I had never heard from her before. It was not a sob. It was something smaller and more precise, like the sound a person makes when they finally understand the full size of a wound they thought was minor. I put my arm around her shoulders. She leaned into me, and I could feel her shaking. My son came into our home, she said. While we were here, while we were sleeping. Reyes nodded carefully. We'd like to conduct a full interior sweep, with your permission. I looked at my wife. She straightened her back, wiped the corner of one eye with her knuckle, and nodded once. Check everything, she said. Reyes started with the kitchen. He moved through each room the way experienced officers do, methodically, without rushing, touching nothing, until he had looked at it from every angle first. Whitfield took the hallway. I followed at the distance they asked me to maintain, which was close enough to watch, and far enough to stay out of the way. Nancy sat on the living room couch with her hands folded in her lap, and her eyes fixed on a point on the wall that I do not think she was actually seeing. The kitchen gave them nothing. The dining room gave them nothing. Then Reyes moved into my home office and everything changed. He stopped just inside the doorway and directed his flashlight toward the desk. Then he crouched down and looked at the underside of the center drawer without touching it. Professor Vance, he said, can you come take a look at something? I stepped into the doorway. He pointed to the back left corner of the desk, just beneath the drawer pull. I had to lean forward to see it clearly. There was a small rectangular object no larger than a USB drive attached to the wood with a strip of dark adhesive. If you were not looking for it, you would never find it. Is that yours? Reyes asked. My throat tightened. No. He photographed it from 3 angles before carefully removing it with gloved fingers and sealing it in an evidence bag. He held it up so I could read the small label on the back, printed in block letters with a fine tip marker. Office Unit 2. The word 2 hit me like a stone dropping into still water. I understood immediately what it meant, and I think Reyes did too, because he looked at me and said, we need to keep going. They found the second device 7 minutes later. It was inside the stuffed bear on the bookshelf in the hallway, the brown bear with the worn left ear that our grandson Marcus had given us 4 months ago, during what turned out to be Jason's last visit to our home. Marcus had carried it in both arms and presented it to Nancy with the gravity of an 8-year-old, making an important diplomatic gesture. He had said his daddy told him to bring it so that Grandma and Grandpa would not miss him so much. Whitfield lifted the bear carefully and turned it over. The seam along the bottom had been restitched not well, but well enough that you would not notice unless you were pressing your fingers along it, looking for exactly that. She cut the stitching with a small blade from her kit and extracted a recording device, slightly larger than a poker chip with a battery pack taped to the side. I had to put my hand on the doorframe. Marcus had carried that bear into our home. My grandson, 8 years old, with his serious face and his father's instructions, had walked through our front door carrying a listening device that Jason had hidden inside his favorite toy. The child had not known. Of course he had not known. But the fact of it, the specific cruelty of using that particular bear, that particular child, that particular gesture of love, made something shift in my chest that I am not sure ever fully shifted back. Mr. Vance, Reyes was beside me. Do you need a moment? No. I said, though, that was not entirely true. Keep going. Whitfield bagged the second device and tagged it while Reyes moved to the hallway vent near the back bedroom. He removed the cover with a flathead screwdriver and directed his light inside. After a moment, he pulled out a third device, this one slightly different in shape, with a small lens on one end, no larger than a shirt button. A camera. Not just a recorder, a camera. I walked back to the living room and told Nancy. She did not make a sound. She reached over and took my hand and held it with both of hers, and I could feel her pulse in her fingertips, fast and uneven. "How long?" she asked, not to me, to Reyes, who had followed me in. "Based on the battery model and the storage capacity on the units we've found," he said carefully, "potentially several weeks. We won't know the exact range until our technicians examine them." Nancy's grip on my hand tightened. Several weeks meant Jason had been listening to us talk about our day, listening to us argue about nothing, listening to me grade papers at my desk at 11 o'clock at night when I could not sleep, listening to Nancy on the phone with her sister, listening to Marcus when he called to say goodnight. "He used his own son," Nancy said. Her voice was flat and very quiet, which was more frightening than if she had shouted. "He put that thing inside Marcus's bear and sent his child in here to plant it for him." Reyes said nothing because there was nothing appropriate to say. Whitfield appeared in the hallway. "2 recording devices and 1 camera recovered so far. I'd like to check the garage and the storage room before we wrap the sweep." "Of course," I said. She disappeared again, and Reyes sat down in the armchair across from us. He leaned forward with his forearms on his knees, and his voice dropped slightly. "Professor Vance, the label on the first device said Unit 2. That means whoever placed these expected at least a Unit 1 to already exist somewhere. Do you own any recording equipment yourself? Anything that might have been repurposed or moved?" "No," I said. He nodded slowly. "Then there may be additional devices we haven't located yet. Our evidence technician will do a more thorough sweep tomorrow morning." He paused. "I want to ask you something directly. Does your son know your schedule well enough to know when this house would be empty?" I thought about the 14 months since Jason had been inside our home. I thought about the phone calls he still made to Nancy, casual chatty calls that always seemed to circle around to questions about where we were going and when. I thought about him offering to fix the back door lock the same afternoon I mentioned to Nancy that the hardware store had the wrong size replacement. "Yes," I said. "He knows our schedule very well." Reyes wrote something in his notepad. Then Whitfield's voice came from the direction of the garage, and the way she said our name told us she had found something else. Whitfield was standing in the middle of the garage with her flashlight pointed at the ceiling when we reached her. Not the floor, the ceiling. There was a smoke detector mounted above the workbench, the same smoke detector I had installed myself 6 years ago when the county updated its residential safety requirements. I had bought it at the hardware store on Route 9, brought it home on a Saturday morning, and climbed a stepladder to mount it exactly where the installation guide recommended. I remembered the afternoon clearly because Marcus had been a newborn then, and Jason had called while I was on the ladder to say that Nancy and I should come see the baby as soon as possible. The detector looked identical to the one I had installed, but Whitfield's light was fixed on a point just below the sensor housing where something caught the beam differently than plastic should. "Don't touch it," she said, though neither of us had moved. "There's a lens behind that grill." Reyes photographed it from 4 angles. Then he called for an evidence technician, which meant we were no longer in the territory of a routine protective sweep. We were in the territory of a crime scene. The technician arrived 40 minutes later. Her name was Carol Briggs, and she worked with the focused efficiency of someone who had done this 1,000 times and understood that the people watching her were having the worst night of their lives. She examined the smoke detector, first removed it from the ceiling mount with careful hands and turned it over on the workbench. The back panel had been replaced. Where the original battery compartment should have been there was a compact camera unit no larger than a matchbox wired to a small memory card and a lithium battery pack. The lens sat flush against the inside of the detector grill, completely invisible from below, unless you knew exactly where to look. "This one is different from the others," Briggs said more to Reyes than to us. "The hallway unit stores locally. This one has a micro-transmitter, short range, but it was sending." "Sending where?" I asked. "Somewhere within about 300 feet, she said. "A receiver. Could be a car parked on the street, could be a device left in a neighboring area. We'll need to run a frequency scan to determine if the transmitter is still active." Nancy was standing just inside the garage door with her arms crossed over her chest, not for warmth, but for the specific reason people hold themselves when they feel their sense of safety leaving their body. I moved to stand beside her, and she pressed her shoulder against mine without looking at me. "How long has it been active?" I asked Briggs. She examined the battery pack under her light. "Based on the charge depletion on this battery model, I'd estimate 4 to 6 weeks. 4 to 6 weeks. I taught 2 morning classes on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Nancy walked to the library on Wednesday afternoons. We ate breakfast at the kitchen table every morning at 7:30 and talked about ordinary things, the news, the neighbors, what needed to be done around the house. We had done all of that for 4 to 6 weeks while a camera transmitted our movements to somewhere 300 feet away. Arthur. Nancy's voice was very low. He watched us. We don't know yet exactly what was captured, Reyes said carefully. But yes, Mrs. Vance, we have to treat this as an active surveillance situation. He used the word surveillance. In 32 years of teaching, I had used that word in lectures about history and political theory, about governments and institutions, and the systematic observation of populations. I had never expected to hear it applied to my garage on a Tuesday evening in March. Briggs moved to the storage room, adjacent to the garage. The same storage room Jason had spent 3 hours helping us reorganize 14 months ago. She was in there for 11 minutes. When she came out, she was carrying an evidence bag containing a power strip I did not recognize. This was plugged into the outlet behind the metal shelving unit, she said. It's not a standard power strip. It has a GSM module built into the casing, basically a cellular relay. It would allow a device in this area to transmit data over a mobile network rather than just short range. She paused. This was installed by someone who planned for long-term collection. Long-term collection. Jason had not come into our home in a moment of desperation. He had not acted impulsively or carelessly. He had come in with equipment, with a plan, with the patience to install multiple devices in multiple locations and then walk out and wait. He had stood in our driveway 14 months ago and hugged his mother and told me the storage room looked great, and then he had driven away, knowing that our house was no longer entirely ours. Reyes asked us to make a list of every occasion in the past 14 months when Jason had been in or near the property visits phone calls, where he asked about our plans any time he had offered to help with something around the house. I sat down on the garage steps with a legal pad Briggs handed me and started writing. Nancy stood over my shoulder and added things I forgot. The list filled 2 pages. When I finished, I looked up at Reyes and said the only thing that felt accurate. He was never helping us, I said. Every single time he showed up, he was working. Reyes took the list from me. He read it once, then folded it carefully and placed it in his case file. Then he looked at both of us with the measured expression of someone about to say something that needed to land correctly. Professor Vance, Mrs. Vance, I'd like to request that you spend a night somewhere other than this house. We'll have technicians here first thing in the morning to complete the sweep, but until we're certain we've located every device, I can't tell you this space is fully secure. Nancy uncrossed her arms. She straightened her back. She looked at me with red-rimmed eyes and a jaw set firm, and she said, "Then we're not done yet. Find the rest of them." We packed 2 bags. Nancy moved through the bedroom with the particular efficiency of someone who has decided that falling apart is not an option. Tonight, pulling clothes from drawers and folding them with a precision that had nothing to do with neatness and everything to do with keeping her hands occupied. I packed my briefcase with the papers I needed to grade and then stood in the doorway of my home office for a long moment, looking at the desk where the first device had been found, looking at the empty bracket beneath the drawer pull where it had sat for God knows how long. And I thought about every conversation I had ever had in that room, every phone call, every argument I had rehearsed alone before bringing it to Nancy. Every time I had sat at that desk at midnight, reading student work and muttering to myself about comma splices. I turned off the light and did not look back. We drove to our neighbor Patricia's house 4 blocks away. She was a retired school teacher who had known us for 20 years and who, when Nancy called from the car and said only that we needed somewhere to sleep, said, "Come now," without asking a single question. That is the kind of friend you spend a lifetime earning. Patricia made tea. Nancy sat at her kitchen table and held the mug with both hands and stared into it. I sat across from her and tried to organize what I knew into something that made sense, and after a while, I gave up on that and just told Patricia the short version. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she reached across the table and put her hand over Nancy's and said, "He is not going to win this." Nancy nodded, but her eyes were somewhere far away. I could not sleep. At 2 in the morning, I was sitting in Patricia's armchair in the dark, and that was when 17 years of small moments began arranging themselves into a shape I had refused to see clearly until now. Jason was 21 when he asked us to fund his enrollment in an art program at a college 3 hours north. I wrote the check without hesitation. I believed in him then with the uncomplicated faith of a father who has not yet had reason not to. 6 months later, the school contacted us about an outstanding balance. Jason had stopped attending after the first semester. He had cashed the tuition check paid 1 month and spent the remainder on things I still do not know about. When I confronted him, he did not apologize. He told me the school had mismanaged his enrollment paperwork, that the administration had lost his registration, that he had been forced to withdraw through no fault of his own. He showed me a letter on school letterhead, confirming this account. I believed him. Nancy believed him. We wrote another check. It was only sitting in Patricia's armchair at 2 a.m, 17 years later, that I allowed myself to wonder whether that letter had been real. The restaurant had come 7 years after that. Jason had a business plan, a location, a supplier already lined up. I gave him $40,000 and told him I believed in him. The restaurant lasted 14 months before closing. Jason called me from the parking lot of the empty building and told me with genuine-sounding bitterness that I had steered him wrong on the location, that I had pushed him toward a neighborhood that could not support a new establishment, that if I had listened to his original instinct, he would have succeeded. I apologized to my son for his failure. I actually apologized. Nancy had told me afterward that she felt terrible for Jason, that he had tried so hard that we should give him time to recover. She had not doubted him because he had not given her reason to yet. He had saved that particular lesson for later. What I understood now in the dark of Patricia's living room was that Jason had never failed accidentally. Every collapse had been constructed to leave me holding the blame. The school enrollment, the restaurant, the 3 years of small loans that never became anything, each one had required a story, and each story had required me to be the villain, and I had played that role so consistently and so willingly that Jason had come to depend on it. He had not come to us for help. He had come to us for material, and when we finally stopped providing it, when Nancy and I sat down 18 months ago and told him that the money was finished, that we loved him, but we could not keep funding a pattern that was harming all of us, something in him had shifted into a different register entirely. I thought about the Sunday he came to help with the storage room. I thought about how cheerful he had been, how patient, how unlike himself. I thought about how I had stood in the driveway watching him drive away and felt a cautious, fragile hope that something had finally changed. It had changed. Just not in the direction I had prayed for. My phone buzzed on the armchair's arm. A text from an unknown number sent at 2:47 in the morning. "You should have just signed the papers, Dad." This didn't have to go this far. My chest did not tighten this time. My hands did not shake. I read the message twice, took a photograph of it with a second device, and forwarded it to the number Reyes had given me before he left. Then I typed back one sentence. "Everything you send me is now evidence. Good night, Jason." I set the phone face down on the armchair arm and sat in the dark for another hour, listening to the house around me settle into its nighttime sounds, thinking about a father who had spent 17 years apologizing for things he had not done. That ended tonight. I was on my second cup of coffee at Patricia's kitchen table when my phone rang at 7:43 in the morning. The caller identified himself as Detective Ray Calhoun, assigned to the case by the county's Criminal Investigations Unit. His voice was unhurried and deliberate, the kind of voice that had learned through experience not to communicate alarm, even when alarm was warranted. He told me the evidence technicians had completed their preliminary sweep of the house and found 2 additional devices, one in the utility room near the water heater, and one inside the smoke detector in the master bedroom hallway. 6 devices total. He let that number sit between us for a moment before continuing. "Professor Vance," he said, "I'd like you to come in this morning, and I'd like you to bring your car." I looked at Nancy across the table. She had heard enough from my side of the conversation to set down her coffee cup. "My car," I said. "Yes, sir. We have some questions about it." Detective Calhoun met us in the parking lot of the County Investigations Building 40 minutes later. He was a heavy-set man in his late 50s with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead and the kind of handshake that communicates competence without trying to. He shook Nancy's hand first, then mine, and walked us inside without preamble. In the conference room, he opened a manila folder and slid a photograph across the table toward me. It showed the interior of a car, my car taken from the angle of the passenger seat, looking toward the driver's side floor. Circled in red marker was a small piece of paper, visible beneath the edge of the seat. "Do you recognize this?" he asked. I studied the photograph. "That looks like it was taken inside my vehicle, but I don't recognize the paper." It was taken yesterday evening after we impounded your car for examination, Calhoun said. The paper is a sheet of draft notes on university letterhead. It contains partial sentences that appear to describe exam question formatting. He paused. It is not the paper itself that concerns us. It is where it was found and what it was designed to suggest. He explained it carefully, the way good detectives explain things, not assuming you already understand, not condescending, just building the picture piece by piece. The sheet had been placed deliberately rather than dropped accidentally. The angle at which it had fallen suggested it had been inserted from the passenger side and allowed to slide naturally under the seat. To anyone searching the car, it would appear to be a document Arthur had been working with and carelessly misplaced. Combined with the photographs of him in the parking garage and the fake text messages, it would establish a pattern, a professor who regularly transported sensitive exam materials in his personal vehicle. Someone put that there, I said. That is our working theory, Calhoun said. Professor Vance in the past 3 months has anyone other than yourself driven or had access to your vehicle. I thought about it carefully. Before we reduced contact, Jason had called on a Thursday morning saying his truck needed a jump, and he was already late for something. I had left the car in the driveway with the spare key under the mat because he said he would only need it for 2 hours. He had returned it the same afternoon, cheerful, grateful, exactly as he had been on the day he cleaned out the storage room. When I told Calhoun this, he wrote it down without reacting. Then he asked if I had ever noticed anything unusual in the car, in the months since anything out of place, any unfamiliar objects. I started to say no. Then I stopped. 2 months ago, driving home from an afternoon seminar, I had noticed a folded piece of paper on the floor of the passenger side. I had assumed it belonged to a colleague who had ridden with me to a faculty lunch the week before. I had picked it up, glanced at it. It appeared to be handwritten notes, nothing recognizable, and dropped it in the recycling bin at home without reading it further. I threw something away, I said. Calhoun looked at me steadily. Can you describe it? Folded paper, handwritten. I assumed it was my colleague's. I didn't read it. What did the handwriting look like? I closed my eyes and tried to pull the image back. The letters had been printed rather than cursive, neat, deliberate, the kind of handwriting that is trying very hard to look casual. It looked like someone was imitating my handwriting, I said slowly, understanding it only as I said it aloud. I thought it was odd at the time. I told myself I was imagining things. Calhoun nodded. We found a third sheet beneath the driver's seat. Same letterhead, same formatting. Whoever placed these in your vehicle placed them in stages, not all at once. They were establishing a trail. Nancy's hand came down flat on the conference table with a sound that made both Calhoun and me look at her. He borrowed that car, she said. Her voice had the tight, controlled quality of a person who has decided that fury is more useful than tears. He borrowed it to plant evidence in it. My son borrowed his father's car and used it against him. Calhoun gave her a moment. Then he looked at me. Professor Vance, I need to ask you about something specific. Your department has a major examination scheduled for next week, correct? The spring comprehensive, I said. Wednesday morning. He folded his hands on the table. Then, whatever Jason was planning, he was planning it to land before that exam. The timing was not accidental. He paused. I need you to tell me everything about that exam, who has access to the materials where they are stored, and whether Jason would have known it was coming. I felt the shape of it then, the full architecture of what Jason had built. Not just the devices, not just the photographs. All of it had been aimed at a specific moment, a specific exam, a specific version of his father, standing in front of a disciplinary committee with no way to explain how the evidence had gotten there. Calhoun's phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at it and then looked up at me with an expression that had shifted slightly. Professor Vance, he said, a retired colleague of yours just contacted our office, a man named Daniel Marsh. I did not know Daniel Marsh had called. I did not know what he had said or why he had called at all. What I knew sitting in that conference room with Calhoun's phone face down on the table between us was that the name alone had landed on me like a cold hand on the back of my neck. Daniel Marsh and I had shared a department for 19 years. We had disagreed about curriculum design, about grading standards, about the proper role of technology in undergraduate instruction. We had disagreed loudly and in faculty meetings and in the hallway outside the copy room. There was a running joke among junior colleagues that Vance and Marsh could not be scheduled for the same committee without a mediator present. When Daniel retired 3 years ago, I had shaken his hand at the retirement party and meant it when I said the department would be quieter without him. I had not meant it as a compliment. What did he say? I asked. Calhoun picked up his phone and read from the screen. He said, and I am quoting directly, "I received an email from the university this morning asking me to confirm a signature on a disciplinary filing. I did not sign anything. I have not signed anything connected to Arthur Vance or anyone else in that department in 3 years. Whoever used my name used it without my knowledge, and I want that on record." The room was very quiet for a moment. "Jason used Daniel's name," I said. "That is what the evidence suggests," Calhoun said. "The filing included a witness declaration attributed to Dr. Marsh supporting the claim that you had discussed selling exam materials with a third party. The university's compliance office sent a routine confirmation request this morning. Dr. Marsh responded within the hour." Nancy leaned forward. "Jason chose Daniel specifically," she said. "He knew they had a difficult history. He was counting on Daniel to either not respond or to use it as an opportunity against Arthur. That was almost certainly the calculation," Calhoun said. "It was the wrong one." He set the phone down and opened a second folder. Inside was a printed still image, grainy, but clear enough taken from what appeared to be a residential security camera, showing the side of our house and the back door. In the frame, a figure in a gray hoodie was crouched at the back door lock. The timestamp in the lower right corner read 3:17 in the morning, 22 days ago. I recognized the way he held his shoulders before I recognized anything else about him. "And that is my son," I said. "The footage came from your neighbor," Calhoun said. "A Mrs. Eleanor Hobbs. She has a security camera mounted on her front porch that captures part of the side access between your properties. She contacted us this morning after Officers Reyes and Whitfield canvassed the street. I knew Eleanor well. She was 70 years old and had lived next door for 11 years, a retired librarian who kept a small garden along our shared fence line, and who brought us persimmons from her backyard tree every October. She had been widowed 4 years ago and lived alone, and I had occasionally worried about her in the way you worry about neighbors who have become something closer than neighbors without either of you quite deciding to make it official. Calhoun told me that when Reyes had knocked on Eleanor's door that morning and asked whether she had seen anything unusual in recent weeks, she had thought about it carefully and then said yes. She remembered a night 3 weeks ago when she had been awake past 3 o'clock because her arthritis had been troubling her, and she had looked out her bedroom window and seen a figure moving along the side of our house. She had recognized Jason, she said, because he had introduced himself to her once outside the hardware store and told her he was Arthur's son, and that he sometimes checked on the house when his parents were traveling. He had told her that. He had walked up to our neighbor in a hardware store parking lot and planted a cover story with her months before he used it. She said she assumed it was a family matter, Calhoun said. She said she was sorry she had not called. "She has nothing to be sorry for," I said, and I meant it completely. Calhoun moved the photograph aside and laid out a timeline on the table, a printed sheet showing dates, each one representing an evening when one of the devices in our house had recorded activity. The camera in the garage had logged motion on 7 separate occasions. The recorder in my office had captured audio on 11 nights. The unit inside Marcus's bear had been active for the entire 4 months since Jason's last visit. 4 months. Every night that bear had sat on our hallway bookshelf, it had been listening. I thought about the evening 3 weeks ago when I had woken at 3 in the morning and heard what I thought was a branch scraping the side of the house in the wind. I had lain in the dark for a few minutes, decided it was nothing, and gone back to sleep. Nancy had not woken at all. Jason had been 40 feet away crouching at our back door, with a key he should not have had doing work he had been planning for months. "He came in that night specifically," Calhoun said, "because that was when your research files were most accessible. Our technicians found evidence on your office computer that an external drive was connected for approximately 18 minutes. No files were deleted, several were copied." "The research materials," I said. "The ones he used to build the fake exam." "Yes," Calhoun said. "He did not take the actual secured exam file because he could not access it. It requires a 2-factor authentication code that changes every 24 hours. So he took the next best thing and built something that looked close enough to fool someone who was not looking carefully." He straightened the papers in front of him and looked at me across the table with the direct, even gaze of a man who has delivered difficult news before and has learned that directness is a form of respect. Professor Vance, the university's disciplinary committee, has scheduled an emergency hearing for this afternoon at 4 o'clock. I cannot stop that process. What I can do is make sure you walk into that room with everything we have found. He paused. I would also suggest you call your wife's phone and retrieve the messages Jason sent her. Every piece of communication he initiated is going to matter. I nodded. Then I looked at Nancy. She was already reaching for her phone. Calhoun gave us 40 minutes with a forensic analyst before the afternoon hearing. Her name was Dr. Susan Farrell, and she ran the county's digital evidence unit out of an office that looked less like a laboratory and more like the inside of a very organized mind. 3 monitors running simultaneously, 2 keyboards, a whiteboard covered in file pathway notations, and a single framed photograph of a golden retriever on the windowsill that seemed to belong to a different, calmer world entirely. She had reviewed the materials from Jason's box overnight and had printed her preliminary findings in a bound document she placed in front of me without ceremony. "I'll walk you through the 3 main components," she said, sitting across from us and opening her own copy. The photograph, the text messages, and the witness declaration. Each one used a different method. Whoever built this file was careful, but careful people still make mistakes. She turned to the first tab. The photograph of me in the parking garage had been constructed from 2 source images. The background, the garage itself, had been pulled from a publicly available Google Street View capture of a parking structure near the university. My image had been extracted from a faculty panel photograph published on the university's official website 4 years ago. A professional photographer had taken that panel photograph at an outdoor faculty reception. I remembered the afternoon. Nancy had ironed my jacket the morning of the event. The extraction was competent, Farrell said. The lighting adjustment was less so. If you look at the shadow angle on your figure versus the shadow angle in the garage background, they are inconsistent by approximately 40 degrees. A casual viewer would not catch it. An analyst catches it in under 2 minutes. She moved to the second tab. The text messages were more sophisticated. They had been generated using an AI voice and text modeling tool, the kind that requires a training sample of the target's written communication to replicate vocabulary, sentence rhythm, and punctuation habits. The training sample, Farrell explained, had almost certainly been drawn from my publicly available published work, 4 books, numerous academic papers, and 17 years. Of course, syllabi posted on the university's faculty portal. The model learned how you write, she said. It learned that you use semicolons frequently. It learned that you favor subordinate clauses over compound sentences. It learned your specific vocabulary range. She paused. What it could not learn is context. The messages read correctly on the surface, but the phrasing in 2 specific exchanges is slightly too formal for a covert transaction. Real people conducting illicit business do not write like academics submitting a peer review. The register is wrong. I had published 4 books. I had posted syllabi online for 17 years. I had given Jason a roadmap to my own voice, and he had handed it to a machine. Nancy made a sound beside me, not a sob, but the short, sharp exhale of someone absorbing a blow they did not see coming. "He used Arthur's own work against him," she said. "Yes," Farrell said simply. "That is exactly what he did." She turned to the third tab, the witness declaration attributed to Daniel Marsh. This one had required a different approach. The document bore Daniel's name, his former faculty identification number, and a notary stamp in the lower right corner. The stamp, Farrell explained, was genuine, meaning it had been produced by a real notary seal. However, the seal number had been reported stolen from a licensed notary in the county 8 months ago. Someone had obtained a stolen seal and used it to authenticate a document that Daniel Marsh had never seen. Obtaining a stolen notary seal and using it on a fraudulent document, Calhoun said from his position near the door, constitutes forgery under California Penal Code, Section 470. That is a felony. Combined with the identity fraud involved in using Dr. Marsh's credentials, without his consent, we are looking at multiple serious charges independent of anything else in this case. I looked at the notary stamp, small, precise, official-looking. Someone had gone to the trouble of sourcing a stolen seal specifically for this. That was not desperation. That was planning. The declaration itself, Farrell continued, was written to sound like Daniel Marsh. Someone had access to his writing style as well, likely from his published work or public statements. But Dr. Marsh's syntax is considerably more direct than yours. Professor Vance, and the declaration blends both styles unevenly in places. Another register error. She closed her copy of the report and folded her hands on top of it. In my professional opinion, and she said, this file was assembled by someone with above-average technical capability, significant patience, and detailed knowledge of your professional life. The mistakes are not the mistakes of an amateur. They are the mistakes of someone who understood 90% of what was needed and underestimated the remaining 10. I thought about Jason sitting in front of a screen, running my syllabi through an AI tool, watching my sentences get disassembled and reconstructed in a voice that sounded like mine but was not. I thought about how long that must have taken, how many evenings, how many iterations before the output satisfied him. He had spent more sustained effort destroying me than he had ever spent on anything I had tried to build with him. "What do we do with all of this at 4 o'clock?" Nancy asked. Calhoun straightened. "Dr. Farrell will provide a written summary to the committee. I will provide a declaration confirming the criminal investigation is active and the evidence is under examination. You will bring your own counsel if you have one." He looked at me. "Do you have an attorney, Professor Vance?" "My brother-in-law is a retired attorney," I said. "He is not a criminal lawyer, but he knows enough to sit beside me and keep me from saying anything I should not." "Call him now," Calhoun said. "You have 2 hours." I picked up my phone. Nancy was already writing a text to her brother. Outside Farrell's window, the golden retriever in the photograph looked out at nothing in particular, calm, in the way that only creatures unburdened by human complications can manage to be. We left Farrell's office at 11:30 and drove back to Patricia's house to collect ourselves before the afternoon hearing. Martin Webb was already pulling into the driveway when we arrived, a yellow legal pad under one arm, and the particular expression of a retired attorney who has been called back into service and is not entirely unhappy about it. He was Nancy's older brother, 64 years old, 3 years out of a family law practice he had built over 3 decades in Fresno. He had handled estates, divorces, custody disputes, and the occasional case that crossed into criminal territory when family situations unraveled past the point of civil remedy. He was not a criminal defense attorney, and he said so immediately when he sat down at Patricia's kitchen table and poured himself coffee without being offered any. "I am not the right lawyer for a criminal proceeding," he said. "But I am the right lawyer for walking into a university disciplinary hearing this afternoon and making sure nobody says anything that creates a problem later. Those are 2 different skill sets, and right now, you need the second one." He looked at me over the rim of his mug. "Tell me everything, Arthur. Start from the box." I told him everything. It took 40 minutes. He did not interrupt except to ask 3 specific questions, the exact wording on the card, whether I had touched anything before the officers arrived, and whether Jason had made any contact since the box was left. I told him about the text message at 2:47 in the morning. He wrote it down word for word and underlined it twice. When I finished, Martin set his pen down and was quiet for exactly 4 seconds. Then he said, "He made a mistake sending that text. Whatever he meant by it, the phrase 'you should have just signed the papers' implies he expected a specific outcome from delivering that box. That is not the language of someone sharing a family archive. That is the language of someone running a coercion strategy." "Calhoun said the same thing," Nancy told him. "Calhoun is right," Martin said. He pulled the legal pad closer. "Now, this afternoon. You do not speak unless I tell you to speak. You answer direct questions with direct answers, and you do not elaborate. And if anyone in that room asks about the criminal investigation, you say only that the matter is being reviewed by county investigators and refer them to Detective Calhoun, nothing more." My phone rang before I could respond. The number was unfamiliar, a local area code, but not one I recognized. I looked at Martin. He nodded once. I answered. "Professor Vance." The voice was dry and deliberate and immediately recognizable, even though I had not heard it in nearly 3 years. "This is Daniel Marsh. I imagine this is an unusual call for both of us." I had not expected him to call me directly. I had assumed his communication would stay with the investigators and the university. The fact that he had tracked down my personal number and that it had taken him less than 3 hours to do so said something about his determination that I was not sure how to categorize. "Daniel," I said. "Yes, it is unusual." "I will be brief," he said. "I want you to know that I called the investigators this morning the moment that email arrived, and I intend to make myself available to the university committee this afternoon in whatever capacity is useful. I also want you to know that I am aware of how this must look the two of us, our history, the fact that my name was on that document. He paused. Whoever used my name understood our situation well enough to think I might not respond, or might respond slowly, or might even be quietly pleased by your difficulty. That calculation was incorrect, and I find it offensive that someone presumed to know my character well enough to use it as a tool. The word offensive landed with the weight of a man who has spent a career choosing words precisely. Daniel, I said I don't know what to say. You don't need to say anything, he said. We were not friends. We are not friends now. But I have spent 30 years in this department, and I know the difference between a man who cuts corners and a man who doesn't. You don't. Whatever else I may think of your semicolon habit, that much I am certain of. Nancy was watching me from across the table with her eyebrows raised. Martin had stopped writing and was listening openly. The semicolon habit, I said. Excessive, Daniel said, with the faint edge of someone who has been waiting 3 years to say it one more time. But not criminal. I will see you this afternoon, Arthur. He ended the call before I could respond. I set the phone down on the table and looked at my wife and her brother. He is coming to the hearing, I said. Martin picked up his pen. Good. A credible witness who voluntarily corrects a forged statement is worth more than almost anything else you could bring into that room. He wrote something and underlined it. What did he say about the semicolons? He called them excessive. Martin nodded seriously. He is not wrong, but that is a conversation for another time. He checked his watch and stood up. We have 90 minutes. Nancy, I need you to forward me every message Jason has sent you in the last 6 months. Arthur, I need a written list of every piece of published work that could have been used to train that AI model. Books, papers, syllabi, anything publicly accessible. He picked up his legal pad and looked at both of us with the calm authority of someone who has stood in difficult rooms before and knows how to fill them. Jason built this file over months. We are going to take it apart this afternoon. Outside, the March sky had gone flat and white, the kind of sky that does not threaten rain, but does not promise anything else either. I sat down with a blank sheet of paper and started writing the list Martin had asked for. 17 years of my professional life, laid out in a column, every piece of it used against me. I wrote it all down anyway, because the answer to someone weaponizing your work is not to hide it. It is to account for every piece of it and refuse to be ashamed. The conference room on the 3rd floor of Whitmore Hall seated 12 people comfortably. That afternoon, it held 14, and the air had the specific quality of a room where everyone present understood that something irreversible was about to happen, but nobody yet knew in which direction. I had been inside this room perhaps 30 times over the course of my career. Budget meetings, curriculum reviews, the occasional tenure discussion. I knew the grain of the long oak table, and the way the afternoon light came through the west-facing windows and made the far end of the room look warmer than it was. I had never sat on the side of the table I was sitting on now. Dean Patricia Holloway occupied the center seat on the committee side. She was a compact woman in her early 60s with short gray hair and the careful, neutral expression of someone who has run difficult meetings before and understands that her face is being read by everyone in the room simultaneously. She had been dean for 9 years. She had hired me. I did not know how to read what was behind her eyes when she looked at me, and I decided that not knowing was probably appropriate. Jason sat to the left, 3 chairs down, with a man I did not recognize beside him, a private attorney in a dark suit who had introduced himself in the hallway as Gerald Fitch. Fitch had shaken my hand with the practiced warmth of someone whose warmth is entirely professional. Jason had not looked at me in the hallway. He was looking at me now. I looked back. I did not look away first. Martin sat to my right with his legal pad open and his pen uncapped. Calhoun had taken a seat along the wall behind us, not at the table present as an observer, which was the correct position for an active criminal investigator in a civil institutional proceeding. Daniel Marsh sat 2 chairs from Calhoun, upright arms, folded with the expression of a man who has made a decision and is entirely at peace with it. Dean Holloway opened the proceedings at 4:03. She stated the purpose of the hearing clearly, and without embellishment, a formal complaint had been filed, alleging that Professor Arthur Vance had engaged in the unauthorized sale of secured examination materials to enrolled students that supporting documentation had been submitted to the university's compliance office and that the hearing was convened to evaluate the complaint and determine appropriate institutional response. She noted that the matter was also the subject of an active county criminal investigation and that the committee's findings today would not constitute a legal determination of guilt or innocence. Then she turned to Jason's side of the table and said, "Mr. Fitch, your client requested this hearing. Please proceed." Fitch was good. I will say that, plainly because it is true. He presented the fabricated case with the measured confidence of someone who had reviewed the materials and believed they were genuine. He walked the committee through the photographs, first the parking garage image, the alleged exchange. My expression in the frame. He placed printed enlargements on the table and gave the committee time to examine them. He presented the AI-generated text messages as a printed transcript, organized chronologically, with a cover sheet summarizing the alleged transactions. He spoke about patterns and consistency and the weight of cumulative evidence. Jason sat beside him without speaking. He had his hands folded on the table, and his face arranged in an expression I recognized from his childhood, the particular look he wore when he was performing sincerity for an adult audience. I had always called it his explaining face. Nancy had always believed it. I had believed it too for longer than I should have. When Fitch finished, Dean Holloway turned to our side. Martin did not stand. He spoke from his seat in the measured tone of someone who has no need to perform confidence because he actually has it. Before we respond to the substance of the complaint, he said, "I want to note for the record that Detective Ray Calhoun of the County Criminal Investigations Unit is present in this room and is prepared to speak briefly about the status of the investigation that was initiated last evening when Professor Vance reported the contents of the box delivered to his home." He paused. "I also want to note that Dr. Daniel Marsh, whose name and credentials appear on the witness declaration attached to this complaint, is also present and has requested an opportunity to address the committee directly." Fitch straightened in his chair. Jason's folded hands tightened slightly. Holloway looked at Calhoun. "Detective, would you like to speak to the committee at this point?" Calhoun stood from his chair along the wall. He spoke for 4 minutes. He did not speculate. He did not characterize. He stated facts. A package had been delivered to the Vance residence the previous evening, containing materials that appeared to constitute a fabricated case against Professor Vance. 6 surveillance devices had been recovered from the property. A criminal investigation was active, and the digital materials in the package were currently being examined by a forensic analyst whose preliminary findings indicated multiple methods of artificial construction. The room was very still when he finished. Fitch said, "The committee should be aware that the existence of a criminal investigation does not—" Dr. Marsh Holloway said, cutting across Fitch with a politeness that was also entirely final. "You've asked to address the committee. Please go ahead." Daniel unfolded his arms. He leaned forward slightly in his chair, and when he spoke, his voice had the unhurried authority of a man who spent decades in front of students and never once needed to raise it to be heard. "My name appears on the witness declaration in the complaint before this committee," he said. "I did not write that declaration. I did not sign it. I did not authorize anyone to use my name, my faculty identification number, or my professional opinion in any document related to this matter or any other." He looked directly at Jason as he said the next sentence. "Whoever attached my name to that document made the error of assuming I would either not notice or not object. I noticed within the hour. I objected immediately. And I want this committee to understand that in 19 years of working alongside Professor Vance, despite our considerable professional disagreements, I never once observed him behave in a manner inconsistent with the ethical standards of this institution." He sat back. Jason's jaw moved slightly the way a jaw moves when the words a person intended to say have stopped being available. Martin reached into his folder and placed a single sheet of paper on the table in front of Dean Holloway. "This is Dr. Farrell's preliminary forensic summary," he said. "I would ask the committee to pay particular attention to the section on shadow angle inconsistency in the photographic evidence and the register analysis of the text message transcripts." Holloway picked up the sheet. She read it once. Then she looked up at Jason. "Mr. Vance," she said, "do you have a response to what has been presented here?" Jason opened his mouth. Fitch put a hand on his arm. Jason shook it off. "Those messages are real," he said. "I can prove every one of them is real. My father has been doing this for years, and everyone in this room is letting him talk his way out of it because he has a title and a parking spot and 30 years of handshakes with the right people." His voice had risen by the end of that sentence. It had not started loud, but it had gotten there, and the getting there was what mattered. Dean Holloway let the silence after his words last exactly long enough to be its own kind of answer. Then she said calmly and with complete authority, "We'll take a brief recess. All parties please remain available." Nancy, sitting beside me, exhaled slowly through her nose. Under the table, her hand found mine and pressed once hard, then let go. Before I tell you what Nancy placed on that table and what everyone in that room heard when she pressed play, leave me a comment. Type truth if you think Jason had no idea what was coming. Type knew if you think some part of him always knew this day would arrive. I will be reading every single one. A reminder what you are about to hear is the turning point of this story, and some of the details surrounding it have been shaped for clarity and impact, but the heart of what it means that I would never change. The recess lasted 11 minutes. I know because I watched the clock on the wall of the hallway outside the conference room for every one of them. Martin stood beside me with his legal pad tucked under his arm and said nothing, which was exactly the right thing to do. Calhoun had stepped away to make a phone call. Daniel Marsh sat on a bench near the stairwell, with his arms folded and his eyes closed, not sleeping, but conserving himself, the way experienced people conserve themselves before a difficult thing. Nancy was not in the hallway. She had excused herself quietly at the start of the recess and walked in the direction of the restrooms at the end of the corridor. I had watched her go and had not followed because her back had the particular set to it that means she needs 10 minutes to be a person before she can be a participant again. 35 years of marriage teaches you the difference. She came back 2 minutes before the recess ended. She was carrying her handbag over one shoulder, and her eyes were clear and her chin was level. She stopped beside me and said in a voice low enough that only I could hear, "I found it this morning when I went back to the house for my reading glasses. It was in the back of your center desk drawer, not where the officers checked the underside, but deeper in, pushed toward the back panel. I almost missed it. I have been carrying it since then. I did not know if it would be needed." I looked at the bag. The recorder, she said. Martin had turned toward us during this exchange. He looked at Nancy with the assessing expression of a lawyer who has just been handed something unexpected and is calculating its value in real time. "Did you listen to it?" he asked her. "Enough of it," she said. He thought for 3 seconds. "All right. When Holloway reconvenes, do not produce it until I ask you to, and when I ask you to place it on the table without comment. Let it speak for itself." Nancy nodded, once the way she nods when a decision has already been made and the conversation is merely confirming it. Inside the conference room, Holloway called the hearing back to order at 4:41. The air had shifted slightly during the recess. Jason's attorney Fitch was leaning close to his client and speaking in a rapid undertone that stopped the moment Holloway sat down. Jason had rearranged his expression back into something more controlled, but the edges of it were not quite right. A man can reassemble a composed face, but he cannot reassemble it perfectly when the ground has moved beneath him. Holloway looked at our side of the table. "Mr. Webb, you indicated before the recess that you had additional materials to present. Please proceed." Martin straightened his legal pad. "Thank you, Dean Holloway. My client's wife, Mrs. Nancy Vance, recovered a recording device from the family residence this morning. The device was found in the desk drawer of Professor Vance's home office. Mrs. Vance did not place it there. Professor Vance did not place it there. It was not there the last time either of them accessed that drawer, which was approximately 6 weeks ago." He paused. "Mrs. Vance will place the device on the table now." Nancy opened her handbag. She removed the recorder, small black, a strip of dark adhesive still visible on its casing, and set it on the oak table in front of Dean Holloway, with both hands as carefully as if it were made of something that might shatter. Fitch said, "The committee should note that an unverified recording introduced without proper chain of Mr. Fitch." Holloway said, "The committee will note whatever the committee determines to be noteworthy. Please allow us to hear what Mrs. Vance has to say." Nancy looked at Holloway directly. "When I pressed play this morning, I heard my son's voice. He was not speaking to anyone. He was practicing. He was reading sentences aloud in a voice that was not his natural speaking voice, then stopping, then reading them again." She reached forward and pressed the play button on the recorder before anyone could object. The sound that came out of the small speaker was not loud, but in a room that had gone completely still, it did not need to be. Jason's voice unmistakably his, with its particular rhythm, and the way he drops the end of certain words, reading a sentence slowly and carefully. A sentence about a price, a sentence about a delivery method, a sentence about discretion, then a pause. Then the same sentence again, slightly differently inflected, the formality adjusted upward. The word choices shifted toward the register of an older, more careful speaker, the register of a professor. He was not reading from a script, he was refining one, working it like a musician working a phrase, playing it, adjusting, playing it again. The recording went on for 4 minutes and 17 seconds. I know because Holloway let it play to the end without stopping it, and I watched the counter on the recorder's display move through every second. When it ended, the room held its breath. Jason's jaw was rigid. His hands folded on the table throughout the entire recording had gone the color of old chalk. Fitch was writing something on a notepad with controlled urgency. The 2 other committee members, who had been largely quiet throughout the hearing, were both leaning slightly forward. Holloway set her pen down. "Mr. Fitch," she said, "before we continue, I want to give your client an opportunity to explain what the committee has just heard. Specifically, I want to understand why a recording device containing audio of this nature was found inside Professor Vance's home office in a drawer that neither Professor Vance nor his wife placed it in." Fitch leaned toward Jason. Jason leaned away from him slightly and looked at Holloway with an expression I had not seen on his face since he was 14 years old and had been caught in something he could not explain his way out of. "Those files were part of a research project," he said. "A personal project about AI voice modeling, academic in nature." "In your father's desk drawer," Holloway said. "I must have left the device there accidentally," Jason said. "During a visit." Martin wrote one word on his legal pad and turned it slightly toward me so I could read it without making it obvious. The word was good. I understood what he meant. Every word Jason said now was being heard by a room full of people who had just listened to 4 minutes and 17 seconds of his voice practicing to sound like mine. There was no explanation available to him that would not make it worse, and he could not stop talking because stopping would be its own kind of confession. "Mr. Webb," Holloway said, turning back to our side of the table, "does your client wish to add anything at this time?" Martin looked at me. I shook my head once. "No," Martin said. "We are content to let the record stand as it is." Holloway looked at the recorder, still sitting on the table between us all. She looked at it for a long moment with the expression of a woman who has run this institution for 9 years and is now recalculating the weight of what has been placed in her hands. Then she turned to the committee members on either side of her and said in a voice that had gone very quiet and very certain, "I'd like to request that the university's technical team run an immediate comparison between the audio on this device and the text transcripts submitted as evidence in the complaint. We will reconvene when that comparison is complete." She looked at Calhoun along the wall. "Detective," she said, "I believe we need to talk." The university's technical coordinator arrived at 4:58. His name was Thomas Greer, and he was younger than I expected, mid-30s, with the slightly distracted energy of someone pulled away from something else and not yet fully oriented to the room he had walked into. He carried a laptop bag over one shoulder and a portable drive reader in his hand, and he stopped just inside the doorway and looked at the number of people present with an expression that suggested this was considerably more audience than he had anticipated. Holloway directed him to the end of the table. He set up his laptop without speaking, connected the portable reader, and looked up at the dean. "I need the recording device and access to the secured exam file archive," he said. "If there is a file number from the submitted complaint materials that will help me run the comparison faster." Martin slid a copy of Fitch's original submission across the table. Greer found the file number in the text message transcript, a 10-digit alphanumeric code that appeared repeatedly across the alleged exchanges as the identifier for what the messages called the spring-secured package. He typed it into his system, waited, and then typed it again with a slightly different expression. "This file number does not appear in our archive," he said. Fitch leaned forward. "The archive may not reflect. Our archive reflects every secured examination document generated by this institution since 2007. Greer said with the patient firmness of someone correcting a factual error rather than winning an argument. "The format of this number is consistent with our naming convention, but the specific code does not correspond to any file that exists or has ever existed in the system." He turned the laptop so the screen faced the center of the table. What I can show you is the actual file number for Professor Vance's spring comprehensive examination, which is currently stored in the archive under restricted access. He pulled up a second window. The two numbers sat side by side on the screen. Even from where I was sitting, several seats away, the difference was visible. The fabricated number and the real number shared the same format and the same length. But 6 of the 10 characters were different. Whoever generated this fake identifier, Greer said, had access to the general naming convention we use, which is published in the faculty handbook, but did not have access to the actual secure archive. So they built a number that looked right without being right. He paused. It is the same principle as a counterfeit bill that gets the paper texture correct, but misprints the serial number. The room absorbed this. I looked at Jason. His hands were still on the table, but they were no longer folded. His left hand had moved slightly away from his right, and his fingers were pressing flat against the oak surface, the way fingers press against something solid when the ground is moving. I had taught enough students over enough years to recognize that posture the body, understanding something before the mind has agreed to accept it. Greer connected the recorder Nancy had placed on the table to his system and ran an audio analysis while the committee watched. It took 6 minutes. Nobody spoke during those 6 minutes. I counted them by watching the small progress bar on Greer's screen move across its track in steady increments the way time moves, when a room full of people has nothing left to do but wait for a machine to confirm what most of them already believe. When the analysis finished, Greer looked up with the careful expression of someone delivering a finding he has verified twice before saying it aloud. The voice on this recording and the voice pattern embedded in the AI-generated text messages are consistent with the same speaker, he said. The text messages were not written by a human in real time. They were generated by a language model trained on a specific corpus of written material. The audio on this recorder appears to be the training and calibration process the speaker was adjusting his vocal and verbal patterns to match the target profile. He looked at Dean Holloway. In plain terms, whoever made this recording was teaching themselves and an AI system to sound like Professor Vance. The two committee members, who had been largely quiet throughout the hearing, were both leaning slightly forward now. One of them, a woman in her 50s with reading glasses pushed down her nose, had stopped writing entirely and was looking at Jason with the focused attention of someone who has just revised a significant assumption. Fitch stood up. "My client would like to request a recess to..." "Your client," Holloway said in a voice that had gone completely flat, "requested this hearing. We are going to finish it." Fitch sat back down. The speed with which he did it told me that he had known from the moment the audio began playing in Task 11 that the architecture of what Jason had built was no longer load-bearing. A good attorney knows when to push and when to stop spending credibility he no longer has enough of. Jason pushed back from the table, not standing, just pushing back, creating distance between himself and the surface where everything was laid out, as if a few inches of space might change what the room now contained. His face had moved past the composed expression he had reassembled after the recess and past the strained explanation about research projects. What was there now was something rawer and less managed, and I recognized it because I had seen it before on a Sunday afternoon when he was 17, and I had found the report card he had altered before bringing it home. He had looked then exactly the way he looked now, not remorseful, recalculating. "Those files were manipulated," he said. His voice had dropped below its usual register, the way voices drop when the speaker is working very hard to sound certain about something they are no longer certain of. "Someone is setting me up the same way they set my father up. I came here to help. I came here because I was worried about him. And now this room is treating me like endidespend, yadofto, Mr. Vance." Holloway's voice was not loud. It did not need to be. "The committee has heard your statement. We have also heard from a forensic analyst, a criminal investigator, a former colleague whose credentials were used without his consent, and the university's own technical coordinator. We have examined photographic evidence, audio, evidence file, authentication data, and the testimony of your mother, who found a recording device in your father's home that contains your voice." She set her pen down with a small, precise sound that landed in the silence like a period at the end of a very long sentence. "I am going to ask you one direct question, and I want you to understand that whatever you say next will be part of this institution's permanent record. Did you place that recording device in your father's desk drawer The room held every breath it contained. Jason looked at Fitch. Fitch gave him a single, almost imperceptible shake of his head, the gesture of a man who has just accepted that the only remaining strategy is to stop generating more evidence. Jason looked at me. I did not look away. I did not lean forward or cross my arms, or make any gesture that could be read as challenge or triumph. I had spent 32 years standing at the front of rooms and learning how to hold space without filling it. I simply looked at my son across a table covered in the wreckage of everything he had built, and I waited the same way I had waited at the end of 1,000 lectures for a student to find the answer they already had inside them. He turned back to Holloway. "I want to speak with my attorney," he said. "Privately." Holloway nodded. "You have 10 minutes, after which this committee will proceed to deliberation." She looked around the table with the measured authority of a woman who has run this institution through difficult things before and intends to run it through this one the same way. "Everyone else, please remain available." Martin put his hand briefly on my forearm as people began to move. He did not say anything. He did not need to. In 30 years of law practice, he had learned the same thing I had learned in 32 years of teaching, that the moments which matter most are often the ones that require the least words. Outside in the hallway, Nancy stood beside me and looked out the window at the end of the corridor where the March sky had finally gone dark. The fluorescent lights in the hallway reflected off the glass, so that the window showed us our own faces alongside whatever was outside, and I thought about how long this day had been and how much further it still felt from over. She took a long breath and let it out slowly. "He looked at you before he answered," she said. "I know," I said. "He wanted to see if you would flinch." "I know that too," I said. She put her arm through mine and leaned her head briefly against my shoulder, and I felt the weight of her, the specific familiar weight of a person you have known long enough that their presence has become part of how you locate yourself in a room. Down the hall, the door to a smaller conference room closed behind Jason and Fitch with a sound that was very final. We waited. The 10 minutes Jason had requested became 23. Martin and I sat on the bench outside the conference room and did not discuss strategy because there was no strategy left to discuss. The hearing had done what it needed to do. What came next would be determined by whatever conversation was happening behind the closed door down the hall, and there was nothing useful either of us could add to it from out here. Nancy had gone to find water. Daniel Marsh had left after the technical presentation, pausing only to shake my hand in the hallway with a grip that communicated everything he had apparently decided not to say out loud. Calhoun was on his phone near the stairwell, speaking in the low, continuous tone of someone who has news to relay and is relaying it carefully. At 5:22, my phone vibrated. It was a text from my nephew Kevin, Nancy's sister's eldest son. We were not close in the way that produces regular communication, birthdays, holidays, the occasional forwarded family photograph. A text from Kevin at 5:22 on a Tuesday afternoon in March was not something I had any framework for. The text contained 4 words and a question mark. "Uncle Arthur." "What is this?" Beneath the words was a screenshot. The screenshot showed a Google Drive share notification. A folder called Vance Documentation Project had been shared with Kevin's email address. Below the notification was a list of files the folder contained. Most of the file names were versions of what I expected: the fabricated photographs, the AI transcript documents, the forged declaration. But at the bottom of the list, between 2 files labeled Final Image Set and Transcript Version 4, was a file named Screen Recording Training Session, March 7th. My chest did not tighten this time. It went very still. I showed the screen to Martin. He read it once, then read it again, and then he stood up from the bench with the controlled urgency of a man who has just seen a door open that was not supposed to open. "Call Calhoun," he said, "right now." I crossed the hallway in 4 steps. Calhoun was already pulling his phone from his ear when I reached him, because his own phone had apparently just received something similar. 2 of his contacts in the county office had forwarded him the same share notification within the previous 90 seconds. "How many people got this?" I asked. "We are finding out," he said. He was already typing. "Do not open the folder yourself. Do not click anything. Forward me the notification and step back." I forwarded it and stepped back. What had happened as Calhoun explained it to me in pieces over the following 30 minutes was this. Jason had been sitting in the small conference room with Fitch, and at some point during that conversation, he had reached the conclusion that the hearing was irretrievable and that his remaining option was to put the fabricated materials directly into the hands of as many family members as possible before any legal mechanism could stop him. The theory presumably was that if enough people received the files and formed opinions based on them before the truth was fully established, the reputational damage might survive the legal outcome. He had opened his phone and navigated to the Google Drive folder, where he had stored everything: the photographs, the transcripts, the forged documents, the evidence he had assembled over months of careful construction. He had selected the folder and chosen the share option and entered a distribution list of family contacts he had apparently prepared in advance. What he had not done in the specific state of mind he was in at that moment was check what the folder contained. The screen recording had been created 6 weeks earlier on a Tuesday evening in March in what appeared to be Jason's home office. It was 41 minutes long. The first 3 minutes showed a desktop with 2 windows open side by side on the left, a collection of Arthur Vance's published academic papers and course syllabi. On the right, an AI text generation interface. For the next 38 minutes, the recording showed Jason working, feeding the documents into the system, running test outputs comparing the generated text to samples of Arthur's actual writing, adjusting parameters, running the outputs again. At minute 26, he switched to a different application and began working with the parking garage photograph. The recording showed in real time and in complete detail the process of extracting my figure from the faculty reception image, adjusting the lighting, placing it against the garage background, and refining the shadow angles, the same shadow angles that Dr. Farrell had identified as inconsistent by 40 degrees. He had saved the recording to the folder automatically. The application he used generated screen recordings of all sessions by default, a fact that was disclosed in the software's terms of service and that Jason had apparently either not read or not remembered. Calhoun had forwarded the recording to Dr. Farrell's office within minutes of receiving it. My phone continued to vibrate with messages from family members, cousins, Nancy's aunts, her brother's son in Portland, all of whom had received the folder, and several of whom had already opened and watched the screen recording, before Jason's follow-up message asking them to disregard everything arrived 4 minutes too late. Martin came to find me in the hallway. He had been back inside the conference room, speaking with Holloway. "She has suspended the hearing pending the criminal investigation," he said. "She also wants you to know, and I am quoting her directly, that the institution will be in contact regarding the formal reinstatement process, and that Professor Vance's position and compensation are to be considered fully intact from this point forward." I looked at him. "She said that now?" I asked. "Tonight?" "She said it in writing," Martin said, and held up his phone so I could see the email she had sent him from across the conference table while he was still standing in the room. "Patricia Holloway has been running this university for 9 years. She knows what the screen recording means, and she is not going to wait for a criminal conviction to do the right thing." Nancy appeared at the end of the hallway. She had found her water, and she had also apparently received the family notifications, because she was walking toward us with her phone held up, and an expression on her face that I had not seen in 2 days, something looser than the controlled composure she had been maintaining, something that was not quite relief, but was in the same territory. "Kevin called me," she said. "He watched the whole thing, 41 minutes. She stopped in front of us. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were bright in a way that had nothing to do with tears. Jason sent the evidence against himself to 31 people." Martin put his pen behind his ear. 31, he said. 31, Nancy said. Down the hall, the door to the small conference room opened. Fitch stepped out first, and his face told the story before any of his words could. Behind him, Jason walked into the corridor and stopped when he saw the 3 of us standing there. He looked at his mother first, then at me. His mouth opened slightly and then closed. Whatever he had prepared to say in that room had not been prepared for this moment, and he knew it, and we all knew it, and the hallway held that understanding without anyone having to give it a name. We did not go back to our house that night. Calhoun advised against it, and Martin agreed, and Nancy and I were too tired to argue with 2 people who were almost certainly right. We went back to Patricia's house and ate the soup she had made without being asked, and Nancy fell asleep on the couch at 9:30 with her shoes still on, and I sat in the armchair and watched the news without hearing any of it until sometime after midnight when I finally closed my eyes. I dreamed about a lecture hall, my lecture hall, the one on the 2nd floor of Crandall Building, where I had taught Introduction to Economic Theory for 11 consecutive years. In the dream, It was full, every seat taken, and I was standing at the front trying to find my notes. And the longer I looked, the more certain I became that the notes did not exist and had never existed, and that I had been teaching from memory for 11 years, without knowing it. I woke up at 6:14 and felt for approximately 4 seconds the specific disorientation of a person who does not yet remember what has happened to them. Then it came back. It always comes back. Calhoun called at 8:40. "Two things," he said without preamble. "First, I want you to come in this morning. Eleanor Hobbs has agreed to give a formal recorded statement, and I would like you present when she does not in the room, but available afterward if we have follow-up questions." "Of course," I said. "Second," he said, and I heard in the slight pause before the word that this one was larger. "A man named Derek Paulson turned himself into our office at 7 this morning. He is claiming to be one of 2 individuals who entered your home on the afternoon your wife met Jason for coffee, approximately 2 weeks before the box was delivered." I sat up straighter in the armchair. Derek Paulson. I had never heard the name. I said so. "You would not have," Calhoun said. "He has a prior record involving theft and fraud, no connection to you or your family professionally. He says Jason contacted him through a third party 6 weeks ago and offered him a flat payment to enter the property and place specific items in specific locations. He was given a hand-drawn floor plan of your home, a list of items to place, and a key." "A key," I said. "A copy of the back door key," Calhoun said, "which Mr. Paulson has surrendered. It matches the profile of the scratches on your lock cylinder. Nancy had appeared in the doorway of the living room in her socks and yesterday's clothes, alerted by the change in my posture. I held up one finger, and she stopped and waited, watching my face. "Why is he coming forward now?" I asked. "The screen recording," Calhoun said simply. 31 people received it last night. Several of them posted it publicly before Jason's retraction message arrived. By 6 this morning, it had been viewed several hundred times. Mr. Paulson watched it at approximately 5:30, realized the full scope of what he had participated in, and made the decision that cooperation was preferable to association." He paused. "In my experience, co-conspirators tend to make that calculation quickly when the principal starts making serious mistakes." We arrived at the County Investigations Building at 10:15. Calhoun met us in the lobby and walked us to a waiting area outside the room where Eleanor's statement was being recorded. Through the narrow window in the door, I could see her sitting across from a female investigator, upright, composed with her hands folded in her lap, and the particular alertness of a person who has decided that what they are doing matters and intends to do it well. She was 70 years old, and she had walked here from her house 4 blocks away because she told Calhoun later she did not want to make a fuss about parking. I could not hear what she was saying, but I watched her hands move occasionally as she spoke small, precise gestures, the kind that accompany specific memory rather than general impression. At one point, she leaned forward slightly, and the investigator across from her wrote something quickly. Her statement, as Calhoun summarized it for us afterward, covered 3 points. She had seen Jason at the back of our property on the night captured by her camera footage. She confirmed the gray hoodie, the deliberate crouch at the lock, the absence of any light source which told her he had not wanted to be seen. She had seen him on 2 other occasions as well, both during daylight hours, both times near the back fence, in the period before we cut contact. Occasions she had not previously mentioned, because at the time she had no reason to find them unusual, and she described the conversation in the hardware store parking lot. Jason had approached her while she was loading bags into her car. He had been friendly, she said, easy and warm, in the way people are when they want something from you, but have not decided to ask for it directly yet. He had told her he sometimes kept an eye on the house when his parents were busy. He had mentioned that Arthur occasionally forgot to lock the back gate. He had made it sound like concern. He was preparing her, Nancy said when Calhoun finished, in case she ever mentioned seeing him. He wanted to already have an explanation in place. "That is our read as well," Calhoun said. He looked at me across the table with the steady expression I had come to associate with information that was about to require something from me. "Mr. Paulson has provided a detailed account of his instructions," he said. "The floor plan he was given matches your home precisely, including the location of your desk drawer, the position of the bookshelf where the bear was placed, and the closet where the envelopes were stored. He says he was told the recorder in the drawer was already in place from a previous entry, and that his job was only to add the physical materials." He paused. He also says there was a second person involved in at least one of the entries. He is providing that person's name today. Does Jason know Paulson turned himself in? I asked. Not yet, Calhoun said, but he will. And when he does, the calculation he has been running since last night is going to change considerably. Outside the window of the waiting room, the morning had gone clear and cold, the sky a flat pale blue that made the edges of everything look more defined than usual. I watched a sparrow land on the windowsill, considered the glass for a moment, and fly away. Eleanor came out of the interview room at 11:40. She saw me in the waiting area and walked directly to me and took both my hands in hers and held them. I am sorry I did not call sooner, she said. Her grip was firm and her eyes were direct. I should have called sooner. You called when it mattered, I told her. That is what counts. She patted my hands once and released them, and then she straightened her coat and picked up her bag and walked back toward the lobby with the unhurried dignity of a woman who has done what she came to do and has a garden to get back to. Derek Paulson's second name took 3 hours to verify. Calhoun told us this in the same waiting area where we had watched Eleanor's interview through the narrow window after she had gone home to her garden and Martin had arrived with sandwiches nobody asked for, but everyone ate. The second individual was a man named Greg Sutter, 41 years old, with a history of petty fraud and a connection to Paulson through a mutual acquaintance in a neighboring county. Sutter had been the one inside our house on the afternoon Nancy met Jason at the coffee shop. Paulson had stayed outside watching the street. Sutter entered through the back door using the copy key, Calhoun said. He placed the envelopes in the closet, confirmed the recorder in the desk drawer was still active, and left through the same door in under 12 minutes. Paulson's account and the device activity logs we pulled from the recorder are consistent. He set his coffee cup down. We have a warrant. The search warrant for Jason's residence had been signed by a county judge at 12:47 that afternoon. Based on probable cause established by Paulson's detailed statement, the screen recording the forensic findings from Dr. Farrell, and the audio comparison conducted by Thomas Greer. Under the Fourth Amendment, a search warrant requires a neutral magistrate to find sufficient evidence that the place to be searched likely contains evidence of a crime. The judge had found that threshold met in under 2 hours. Officers executed the warrant at 2:15. We were not present for the search. Calhoun had made clear that was not appropriate, and Martin had agreed. And so Nancy and I sat in the waiting area and did not talk much and drank coffee that had been sitting too long and watched the clock on the wall move through the afternoon. At 3:47, Calhoun came back. He sat down across from us and opened his notebook. I'll tell you what I'm permitted to share at this stage, he said, which is more than I expected. He looked at his notes. Officers recovered a laptop containing the original project files, the AI training corpus, the image editing sessions, the generated text transcripts. The screen recording we already had is one of 14 similar recordings on the device, covering different stages of the construction process over approximately 3 months. Nancy's hand closed around her coffee cup. 3 months, she said. Beginning in late December, Calhoun confirmed. He started building this in December and finished in early March. 14 separate work sessions, each one recorded automatically by the software. He turned a page. They also recovered a copy of the backdoor key, consistent with the one Paulson surrendered. And they found the floor plan he provided to Paulson hand-drawn accurate to within a few inches, including the position of the bookshelf where the bear was placed. He paused before continuing. There were also 2 binders, he said. Something in the way he said 2 binders made me set down my cup. The first contained what appeared to be a financial strategy document, Calhoun said carefully. Notes about the assessed value of the property, outstanding mortgage balance, and calculations related to what Jason apparently believed would be the outcome of a forced sale under distress conditions. The document included a projected timeline. The box was supposed to arrive 6 days before the spring comprehensive examination. The disciplinary hearing was supposed to conclude before you had retained counsel. The property transfer was supposed to be initiated before the criminal investigation could establish its scope. He looked at me steadily. Every step had a projected date beside it. You were running about 3 days behind his schedule when you called 911 instead of opening the box alone. The room felt very quiet. I thought about sitting in my car in the driveway with the engine running, watching Jason's silver sedan disappear around the corner. I thought about the 3 seconds I had spent deciding not to touch the box. 3 seconds that had apparently disrupted a timeline 3 months in the making. "What was in the second binder?" Nancy asked. Calhoun looked at her. The second binder contained personal records, bank statements, medical documents, old correspondence, some of it belonging to you, Mrs. Vance, some to Professor Vance, some to Marcus. He closed his notebook and held it closed with both hands. There was also a section containing copies of letters addressed to Professor Vance, personal letters, some going back several years. He slid a single photograph across the table. It was an evidence photo, a plastic sleeve containing what appeared to be an envelope yellowed at the edges, with my name written on the front, in handwriting I did not immediately recognize. "That envelope was sealed," Calhoun said. "It has been logged as evidence and cannot be opened until the investigation reaches an appropriate stage. But the return address on the back is Jason's." I picked up the photograph and looked at the handwriting on the front, my name written carefully in the deliberate printed letters of someone who had taken their time. The envelope was not recent. The yellowing and the slight warping of the paper suggested it had been sitting somewhere for years. Nancy leaned over and looked at it beside me. She did not say anything. She pressed her lips together and breathed carefully through her nose. "How old is it?" I asked. "We do not know precisely," Calhoun said. "The paper analysis will give us a range, but based on the condition and the ink oxidation, the preliminary estimate from our document examiner is 5 to 7 years. 5 to 7 years? Jason would have been in his mid-30s. Marcus would have been a toddler. I set the photograph down on the table between us and looked at it for a long moment. A sealed envelope with my name on it, written by my son's hand, sitting in a binder full of records he had used to plan my destruction. He had written something to me and kept it. Whatever it said, he had decided not to send it, and had held onto it instead, long enough for the paper to yellow and the ink to oxidize right up until the moment he put it in a binder beside projected property values and disciplinary hearing timelines. "When can I read it?" I asked. "When the case is resolved," Calhoun said. "I am sorry. I know that is not the answer you want." He was right. It was not. But I had spent 2 days learning that the answers available to me were not always the ones I wanted, and that waiting for the right moment was sometimes the only honest option. Martin reached over and picked up his legal pad. "What are the next steps?" he asked. Calhoun straightened. "Jason will be contacted today regarding the warrant findings. Given Paulson's cooperation and the volume of evidence recovered, I expect we will be looking at a formal arrest within the next several days." He looked at both of us. "I want you to go home tonight. The technicians completed their sweep this morning. Every device has been removed and logged. Your house is yours again." Nancy stood up before I did. She picked up her bag and her coat and looked at Calhoun with the direct, clear gaze of a woman who has been managing impossible things for 2 days and is ready now to go home. "Then let's go home," she said. Jason was arrested on a Thursday morning, 8 days after the box appeared on our doorstep. Calhoun called me at 9:47 to tell me. I was sitting at my desk in the home office, the same desk where the first recording device had been found, the same drawer that now closed and opened, exactly as it always had, with no adhesive strip and no label and nothing hidden beneath it. I had been trying to grade midterm papers. I had read the same opening paragraph of the same essay 4 times without retaining a word of it. When Calhoun said the words, I set the essay down and looked at the window. Outside the oak tree Nancy had planted the year we moved in was doing what oak trees do in early April in Central Valley, putting out the first pale green of new leaves against a sky that had finally decided to be warm again. I watched it for a moment and did not say anything, because the feeling that moved through me was not triumph, and it was not relief, and it did not have a name I could locate quickly. "What are the charges?" I asked. Calhoun read them from his notes. Residential burglary under California Penal Code, Section 459 for the unauthorized entries through the back door. Stalking under Section 6, 46.9 for the sustained pattern of surveillance. Criminal conspiracy under Section 1, 8.2 covering the coordinated plan involving Paulson and Sutter. Forgery under Section 4, 70 for the fabricated documents and the stolen notary seal. Identity fraud under Section 5, 30.5 for the unauthorized use of Daniel Marsh's credentials, and wire fraud, a federal charge for using electronic communications to transmit fabricated materials with intent to defraud. 6 charges. The The federal wire fraud charge meant the case had crossed jurisdictions, which Calhoun explained would complicate Jason's legal situation considerably and reduce the options available to Fitch in terms of negotiating a favorable outcome. "What about Paulson and Sutter?" I asked. "Both have been charged as co-conspirators," Calhoun said. "Their cooperation will be weighed at sentencing, but cooperation does not eliminate culpability. They entered your home. That is residential burglary regardless of who directed them." I thanked him and ended the call. Nancy was in the kitchen when I came downstairs. She was standing at the counter with both hands wrapped around a mug, looking out the window above the sink at the backyard, at the new lock on the back door, the one we had installed the morning after we came home, the one whose key existed in exactly 2 copies, both of which were in the drawer beside the stove, where we had agreed they would live. "He's been arrested," I said. She nodded slowly the way you nod when you have been expecting something, and its arrival does not feel like news so much as confirmation. She did not cry. She had not cried since the first night, and I had come to understand that the absence of tears was not the absence of grief, but something more complicated, the particular composure of a woman who has had to hold things together for so long that the holding has become structural. "How are you feeling?" she asked. Not about herself, about me. "I don't know yet," I said honestly. She moved to the kitchen table and sat down, and I sat across from her, and we stayed there for a while with our coffee going cold between us, the way coffee does when the thing you are sitting with is larger than the practical matter of drinking it. Calhoun met with us that afternoon to walk us through the full inventory of what had been recovered from Jason's residence. He brought a printed summary, 12 pages organized by category. I read it at the kitchen table with Martin beside me and Nancy across from us, and each page had the quality of a door opening onto a room I had not known existed. The laptop contained not only the 14-screen recordings, but also a folder of research materials Jason had assembled about me over what appeared to be several years, faculty meeting schedules, obtained through public records requests, published interviews I had given to university publications, speaking engagements listed on the department website, and a folder of personal photographs that I recognized as having been taken at family gatherings over the past decade. He had been building a file on me long before December. The first binder contained the financial strategy as Calhoun had described, projected sale values, mortgage calculations. A timeline so specific it included the name of a real estate attorney Jason had apparently contacted to discuss a potential forced sale scenario. The attorney Calhoun noted had declined the consultation when the circumstances were explained, and had since provided a statement to investigators. The second binder was harder. It contained records going back 15 years, bank statements with highlighted transactions, medical records obtained through means Calhoun declined to specify pending the investigation, printed copies of emails from our personal accounts, and a section near the back that contained school documents belonging to Marcus report cards, teacher notes, a photograph of Marcus at his 3rd grade science fair, standing beside a model of the solar system he had built from painted styrofoam balls. Marcus had no idea any of it was there. The last item Calhoun placed on the table was the photograph of the sealed envelope, my name and Jason's careful printed letters, the yellowed paper, the return address in the upper left corner. "The document examiner has completed the preliminary dating analysis," Calhoun said. "The paper and ink are consistent with a range of 5 to 6 years ago. Based on contextual details in the binder where it was found, our best estimate is that it was written approximately 5 years ago and placed in the binder within the following year. 5 years ago. Marcus had been 3 years old. Jason had written something to me, placed it in an envelope, sealed it, and then filed it in a binder alongside financial calculations for taking apart everything I had built. There's one more thing," Calhoun said. He turned to the last page of the summary. In the same section of the second binder behind the envelope, investigators found a handwritten note. It was not sealed, it was not addressed to anyone. He slid the page toward me. The note was a photocopy of 3 lines in Jason's handwriting. "I know what I'm doing. I know what this costs." I decided anyway. I read it 3 times. Then I set it down on the table with the particular care of someone handling something that might leave a mark. Martin said nothing. Nancy looked at the 3 lines for a long moment and then looked at me. Outside, the oak tree moved slightly in the afternoon wind, its new leaves catching the light, the way new things do, bright and provisional, and not yet aware of what they will have to withstand. The case took 9 months to reach its conclusion. I will not recount every motion and delay and procedural hearing that filled those months, because the law is not a story, it is a process, and processes are not built for narrative. What I will say is that Jason changed attorneys twice that Fitch withdrew in June, citing irreconcilable differences over strategy, and that the attorney who replaced Fitch's replacement filed 4 separate motions to suppress evidence, all of which were denied. I will say that Paulson and Sutter accepted plea agreements in September and testified against Jason in exchange for reduced sentences. I will say that the federal wire fraud charge was the one that narrowed the options most severely, because federal charges carry mandatory minimums that state negotiations cannot touch. In October, Nancy asked me whether I thought Jason would take a plea. I told her I did not know. What I knew was that every morning I drove to work on roads I had driven for 30 years, parked in the same spot I had parked in since the university resurfaced. The faculty lot in 2014, walked the same hallway to the same office, and stood at the same whiteboard in front of students who had heard something happened and were too polite to ask directly. The university had reinstated me formally in writing in March with a letter from Dean Holloway that used the words full confidence and institutional regret in the same paragraph. The department gave me a standing ovation at the April faculty meeting that I did not know how to receive and accepted anyway. Life had resumed. It had resumed imperfectly and with weight I was still learning to carry, but it had resumed. Jason accepted a plea agreement in late November. He pleaded guilty to residential burglary, criminal conspiracy, forgery, identity fraud, and the federal wire fraud charge. The stalking charge was incorporated into the conspiracy count at the prosecution's discretion. At sentencing in early December, the judge noted that the sophistication and duration of the scheme, the involvement of co-conspirators, the targeting of an educational institution, and the federal component all weighed toward the higher end of the applicable range. Jason received a sentence of 6 years in federal custody, to be followed by 3 years of supervised release. He did not look at me during sentencing. He looked at the table in front of him with the focused attention of a man who has decided that the way to get through a thing is to look only at the immediate surface directly before him and nothing else. I understood that. I have taught long enough to recognize it as a strategy rather than an absence. Nancy sat beside me and held my hand throughout. Her grip was steady and did not change when the sentence was announced. Calhoun called the following morning. "The evidence hold on the personal items from the second binder has been released," he said. "You can collect them at your convenience. There is one item in particular I want you to know is there." I knew which item he meant. Nancy drove me to the county evidence facility on a Tuesday in mid-December. The sky was the particular gray of a California winter that cannot decide whether it intends to rain. She parked and said she would wait in the car, and the way she said it told me she understood that what was inside was something I needed to do alone first. The evidence clerk, a young woman with reading glasses on a beaded chain, walked me to a table in a small room with fluorescent lighting and no windows, and set a clear plastic sleeve in front of me. Inside, the sleeve was the envelope. My name in Jason's printed letters. The upper left corner with his return address faded now to a pale rust color against the yellowed paper. The clerk left the room. I sat with the envelope for a moment before opening it. The plastic sleeve had been unsealed already. The forensic examination had required opening it, and the contents had been documented and photographed before being returned to the original envelope and re-sleeved. I had been told this. What I had not been told was how it would feel to hold it. It felt like holding something that had been waiting a long time. That is the only accurate description I have. I removed the envelope from the sleeve and opened it. There were 2 pages inside written on plain white paper in the same careful printed letters as the address. No date, no salutation. Just the words beginning at the top of the first page without preamble, the way someone writes when they have been composing the thing in their head for so long that the formal opening no longer seems necessary. I know I took the money from the tuition account. I know you knew. I know you paid it again anyway and didn't say anything. And I told myself that was just what you did, that it was easy for you, that it didn't cost you anything. That was not true, and I knew it was not true when I told it to myself. The restaurant failed because I stopped caring about it in the 3rd month. Not because of the location, not because of anything you said. I stopped caring because it was harder than I thought it would be, and I had already decided by then that hard things were your fault. I have been making that decision about you for a long time. I don't know when it started. I think it started before, I had a reason, and then I spent years collecting reasons to fit around it. Marcus was born, and I looked at him and I thought, this is what a person is. Before they learn how to be disappointed, and then I thought about you and I felt something I didn't have a word for, and I put the paper away. The second page was shorter. I know what I should do. I know what it would require. I know that you would accept it, because that is what you do, and I know I should be grateful for that, and I am not, and I don't know what to do with the fact that I am not. I am going to keep this. I am not going to send it. I don't know why I'm writing it down, except that writing it down is the only way I have of knowing whether I actually believe it. I think I do. I think that's the problem. That was where it ended. No signature, no closing. Just the last sentence sitting at the bottom of the second page with space below it, as if he had left room in case something else came to him later. I sat in that fluorescent room for a long time after I finished reading. I read it twice more, not looking for new information. The words did not change, but because some things require more than one reading before you know how to carry them. Jason had known. 5 years before the box appeared on my doorstep, he had known exactly what he was doing, and why I had written it out in plain language on 2 pages of white paper, had sealed it in an envelope addressed to me, and had then placed it in a binder beside financial projections for my destruction. He had known, and he had decided anyway. He had told me so himself in the 3-line note that was not addressed to anyone. I folded the letter carefully along its original creases and placed it back in the envelope and held it for a moment. Then I put it in the inside pocket of my jacket, close to my chest, where I could feel the slight weight of it against my ribs as I walked back out to the parking lot where Nancy was waiting. She looked at my face when I got in the car. She did not ask what the letter said. She put her hand on mine on the center console and looked forward through the windshield at the gray December sky. "Ready?" she said. I thought about the word. I thought about what it meant to be ready for something you have already survived. "Yes," I said. "Let's go home." She started the car, and we drove home through streets I had known for 30 years, past the hardware store on Route 9 and the library where Nancy walked on Wednesday afternoons, and the school where Marcus was in class right now, learning something that had nothing to do with any of this. My phone buzzed in my pocket as we turned onto our street. A text from Marcus sent from his school tablet during what was technically reading period. "Grandpa, can we make pancakes this weekend?" I looked at those 6 words for a long moment. Then I typed back 4, Saturday morning. Be there. Marcus arrived at 7:45 on Saturday morning with flour on his sleeve before he had touched a single ingredient, which told me he had been practicing his entrance. He was 9 years old now. His birthday had fallen in October, during the period when the case was moving toward its conclusion, and Nancy and I were learning how to celebrate ordinary things in the middle of extraordinary circumstances. We had taken him to the diner on Clearwater Road that he had been requesting since June, and he had eaten an amount of pancakes that suggested he had been training for the occasion. When I asked him afterward if he was full, he thought about it seriously for a moment and said mostly. He was the kind of child who answered questions seriously. I had loved that about him, since he was old enough to answer questions at all. He climbed onto the stool at the kitchen counter and watched me measure flour with the focused attention of someone who intends to do this himself one day and is gathering operational intelligence. Nancy poured him orange juice and ruffled his hair, and he accepted both without looking up from the measuring cup. "Grandpa," he said, "how come you always use a fork to mix pancake batter instead of a whisk?" "Because a fork keeps more air in the batter," I said. "Whisks over mix." He considered this. "Did someone teach you that, or did you figure it out?" "Your grandmother taught me," I said, 20 years before you were born." Nancy looked up from the orange juice with an expression I had not seen in a while. Something unguarded and warm, and entirely present, the expression of a person who has come back to themselves after a long time away, and is noticing the specific quality of the light in their own kitchen. We made pancakes. Marcus ate 6. I ate 3. Nancy ate 2 and declared herself the most sensible person at the table, which Marcus disputed on the grounds that sensible people do not put blueberries in pancakes. A position he held with the conviction of someone who has thought about this more than once. It was by any measure an ordinary Saturday morning. I had not understood until recently how much work goes into an ordinary Saturday morning, how many things have to remain intact, how many small decisions have to go undisturbed, how many people have to show up and be themselves for a morning to be simply what it appears to be. I understood it now in a way I had not before, and the understanding did not make it heavy. It made it specific. It made each detail: the flower on Marcus's sleeve, the fork in the batter, the argument about blueberries, feel like something that had been chosen rather than simply arrived at. After breakfast, Marcus asked if he could sit at my desk and draw. I said yes. He disappeared into the home office with a pad of paper and a cup of colored pencils, and left Nancy and me at the kitchen table with our coffee and the particular quiet that falls after a child has been absorbed by something. Nancy wrapped both hands around her mug and looked at the back door. The new lock caught the morning light in a way the old one never had. The mechanism was slightly different, a higher-grade deadbolt that the locksmith had recommended, and the brass of it was still new enough to be bright. I had stopped noticing it the way you stop noticing a healed scar. It was part of the door now. The door was part of the house. The house was ours. "I've been thinking about Jason," Nancy said. I waited. "Not about what he did," she said. "I think I've finished thinking about that, or as finished as I'm going to get. I've been thinking about that letter." She looked at her mug. "About the fact that he wrote it." "He wrote it and kept it," I said. "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. "That means something. I haven't decided what it means, but it means something. I had been thinking about it too, in the way you think about something that does not resolve turning it over, setting it down, picking it up again. The letter did not change what Jason had done. It did not undo the months of planning, or the devices in our house, or the forged documents, or Marcus's bear, or the 3 lines that said, "I decided anyway." It did not require me to feel something I did not feel, or forgive something I was not ready to forgive. What it did was, it told me that the person who had done those things was not entirely unknown to me, that somewhere inside the architecture of what he had built was a room where he had known the truth, had written it down, had sealed it in an envelope with my name on it. What he did with that knowledge was his choice and his consequence. But the knowledge had existed. That was not nothing. "I think it means he was never entirely lost," I said. "I think it means he knew the way back and chose not to take it. That's a different kind of grief than thinking someone never knew the way at all." Nancy looked at me across the table with the expression she has when I have said something she has already thought but not yet put into words. "Yes," she said. "That's exactly what it is." From the home office, Marcus called out without coming to find us, the way children call out when they want to confirm you still exist, without interrupting what they are doing. "Grandpa, Grandma, are you still there?" "Still here," I called back. "Okay," he said, and we heard the pencils resume. The semester began again in January. I had been back in the classroom since April. Dean Holloway had moved quickly on the reinstatement, and the department had accommodated the transition with more grace than I had expected. But January felt different. January was the beginning of a new term, the first one that started without the weight of the previous year, still pressing against it from behind. I stood at the front of the lecture hall on the first morning and looked out at the rows of faces the way I had looked out at rows of faces for 32 years. Freshmen in the front rows, slightly too eager, their notebooks already open. Upperclassmen toward the back, calibrating how much attention this particular course would require. A few faces I recognized from previous semesters, which meant they had sought out my section specifically, which meant something I tried not to let myself feel too much of, because feeling it too much would make me less useful to them. I set my notes on the podium. I uncapped my marker. I looked at the whiteboard the way I always look at the whiteboard at the beginning of a lecture, finding the center of it, getting my bearings. Then I did what I have done for 32 years. I taught. Afterward, walking back across campus to my office in the January afternoon, I passed Eleanor Hobbs coming the other direction, on the path that runs along the edge of the faculty parking lot. She was walking her neighbor's dog, a large and philosophically calm retriever named Howard, and she stopped when she saw me, and Howard sat down beside her with the air of an animal that has made his peace with interruptions. "Professor Vance," she said, "how was the first day?" "Good," I said. "It was good." She nodded with the satisfaction of someone who had anticipated this answer and is pleased to have it confirmed. "I made persimmons jam last week," she said. "I'll bring some over." "I'll tell Nancy," I said. She clicked her tongue at Howard, who stood and resumed walking with the dignified patience of a creature who had never doubted they would get where they were going eventually. I watched them go for a moment, then turned and walked the rest of the way to my office. Inside, on my desk, beside the stack of syllabi I had printed that morning, was a small framed card that Nancy had placed there the week before, without telling me she was going to do it. The card had 4 words on it, printed in plain black letters on white paper. "Don't make a scene." She had framed it because she said it no longer sounded like a threat to her. It sounded like the moment everything changed. She wanted it somewhere. I would see it every day, not as a reminder of what had been done to us, but as a marker of the decision I had made when I set the box down and reached for the phone instead. I sat down at my desk and looked at it for a moment. Then I opened the stack of syllabi and began writing the names of the students I had just met. I have told you this family story, not because I am proud of how long it took me to see clearly, but because I believe someone watching this needs to hear it. For years, I confused loyalty with silence. I kept writing checks and absorbing blame and telling myself that was what fathers do. It was not. It was what people do when they have been trained to believe that keeping the peace is the same as keeping the family. It is not the same thing. It has never been the same thing. This is a family story about what happens when love becomes leverage and what happens when one person finally refuses to let it. Here is what I would tell any father, any parent watching this right now. Document everything. Trust the moment when something feels wrong because that feeling is rarely mistaken. And do not confuse the preservation of a relationship with the permission to be harmed by it. Family betrayal is not less serious because it comes from someone who shares your name. It is more serious. It requires more courage to face and more honesty to survive. I am not a religious man by habit, but standing in that lecture hall in January looking at those faces, I understood what it means to be given something back. I believe God returns what was taken from you when you stop trying to hide what was done. Family betrayal leaves marks that do not disappear quickly, but they do change. They become the outline of the thing you survived. If this family story reached something in you, leave a comment, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe so you never miss what comes next. I read every word you write. Thank you for staying until the end. The stories ahead contain fictional elements crafted purely for reflection and understanding. If that is not what you came for, no hard feelings. Choose what serves you. We will be here when you are ready.